The Ethical Challenge, the Ethics of Stewardship. The Institute plays a leading role in seeking to reinstall stewardship at the heart of banking culture. We insist that shareholders' rights of ownership should not overwhelm banking's broader principles of social stewardship. For bankers, the idea of stewardship can sometimes seem as elusive as it is important. The dictionary definition looks straightforward enough: acting for others by managing property, financial affairs, or an estate. But then, understandably perhaps, banks themselves like to go further and devise their own illustrative definitions. In the US, one Los Angeles bank describes its stewardship almost wholly in monetary terms. It allocates 10% of profits to provide education, help for the needy, medical care, rehabilitation, food for the hungry, and other worthy services. In the UK, Barclays prefers a less sharply focused definition of stewardship as our passion about leaving things better than we found them. For Lloyds, stewardship is its encouragement of almost 1.5 million people to vote for grants of up to £3,000 from its community fund to assist local projects in 350 neighbourhoods. But for us at the Institute, stewardship shouldn't be confused with corporate social responsibility. It's not about demonstrating good through specific programmes. It's an ethos that needs to sit at the heart of a sustainable bank, or for that matter, any type of business. Post-crisis amongst the UK's regulators, stewardship is a term that seems to have been avoided. Yet so much of what they now seek through very detailed operational regimes to encourage individuals to take greater responsibility for and be held to account for their actions does indeed appear to amount to stewardship by other names, at least to us. Yet the word itself is one that regulators fastidiously shrink from using. Part of the reason perhaps comes from the many linked responsibilities inherent in the very concept of stewardship. As bankers, we see stewardship as the professional recognition that our first duty is the responsible management of our customers' wealth. That's an ethical principle we see at the very heart of banking. But there's more to it than this. Beyond a banker's primary duty as the trusted steward of customers' funds, there are other pressing obligations. The need to be a steward, too, in the appropriate and effective use of our own organisation's resources. The need to care for and support the professional needs of our banking colleagues and peers. And the need to help husband society's scarce shared resources, held in trust for future generations. In this way, stewardship asserts itself as one of the core principles on which we want to see banking built. But it's also impossible to ignore some of the tripwires around this idealism. The banker's first commercial duty, for instance, is surely to earn a good return for our shareholders. In practice, therefore, do bankers' fiduciary duties simply override their wider obligations to their customers and society? In our view, they don't, as a good long-term return for shareholders requires meeting those wider obligations too. There's an additional moral dimension. It arises from the specially privileged role we give to banks in society, those characteristics that make banks different from other joint stock companies. The first of these is the broad expectation we impose on banks, but on no other sector, as pivotal stewards in maintaining social and economic growth and stability. The second is the unique empowerment enjoyed by banks to create money and accept deposits from the public. It's never easy to balance these two. Shareholders have every right to earn a return on their investments in banking enterprises. At the same time, we insist that this right of ownership shouldn't overwhelm banking's broader principles of social stewardship. The banking crisis relentlessly exposed the degree to which this balance between ownership and stewardship has been weakened. The banking industry found itself coming down more and more firmly on the side of narrow shareholder value as opposed to broader social stewardship. There are obstacles to correcting that imbalance. One is the fact that, apart from actually acquiring or disposing of stakes, shareholders themselves have become increasingly remote from the practical operations of businesses in which they're invested. As owners, they find themselves able to exercise far less direct control than in times past. Control now rests increasingly with company managements, and the time horizons against which managerial performance is measured has relentlessly shrunk. Historically, your worth as a steward could be measured against relatively long-term criteria concerning the reputation and long-term value of the company. The key test was whether your stewardship left the company as a whole, or that part for which you were responsible, your division, your team, your branch, in a better long-term sustainable financial and reputational position. That remains a valid test for any good banker. But most ownership is now no longer vested so conveniently in individuals. Shares are held by institutions, by fund managers engaged to invest trillions in key currencies belonging to billions of people via millions of corporations around the world. And they're being held to achieving targeted returns on urgent yearly, half-yearly and quarterly timeframes. At the same time, the growth of institutional ownership has diluted the ethic of personal stewardship. Ownership has literally become impersonal. In the past, small groups of, often family owners with larger proportionate stakes, had much more to lose personally and reputationally. This encouraged care and a motivation to pass the business down to future generations. Today's institutional ownership spreads risk more widely, making the institutions themselves arguably less motivated by wider concerns of social stewardship. This may be changing. Post-crisis, we're seeing a gradual rise of more activist investment funds focused on trying to change managerial behaviour in banks and elsewhere. It's a movement that's, to some degree, encouraged by the stance of organisations like the Financial Reporting Council, whose voluntary stewardship code aims to promote good practice in the investor community. It suggests that institutional investors should publicly disclose how they'll discharge their stewardship responsibilities, have a robust, open policy on managing conflicts of interest in relation to stewardship, monitor their investee companies, establish clear guidelines on when and how they'll escalate their activities to protect and enhance shareholder value, act collectively with other investors where appropriate, have a clear policy on voting and disclosure of voting activity, and report periodically on their stewardship and voting activities. The Financial Reporting Council encourages companies to commission regular independent surveys of all key stakeholders, such as customers, employees, owners, suppliers, and so on, to assess a bank's performance against 5 good governance criteria: its ethical approach, its shared business goals, sound management and organisation, transparent operation, and its accountability. And this is not the only attempt to codify financial stewardship. Since late 2011, this institute has itself taken the lead with an initiative to reinstall stewardship at the heart of banking culture. With the chairman and chief executives of 9 major UK banks, we launched the Chartered Banker Professional Standards Board as a determined, collective commitment to restoring trust in the banking profession. The Chartered Banker Code of Professional Conduct, set out on the next page, sets out the key attitudes and behaviours expected of banking professionals, and the supporting professional standards we're developing set clear benchmarks against which customers, colleagues and others can measure the ethical and professional competence of bankers. We want the leaders of our banks to think of themselves as stewards, making best use of the assets and resources they're entrusted with before passing them on to the next generation. This ethic of stewardship certainly does mean sustaining a culture of professional development and continuous improvement to restore personal pride in our banking profession. But it means more. For us as professionals, the big challenge is to strike a workable balance between the specific short-term rights of ownership, the shareholder's legitimate expectation of a return on investment, and a bank's broader duty of stewardship, its unique long-term role in maintaining an optimal economic and social stability. In retrospect, what we can now see clearly about the conduct of banking in the later years of the 20th and the early years of the 21st centuries was how perilously that balance was lost at times. We came down firmly, in many cases, on the side of short-term ownership value at the expense of that long-term social stewardship so vital to the value and reputation of our banks. Regaining that balance between ownership and stewardship is today's imperative. In 2011, the Chartered Banker Professional Standards Board was established by the chairman and chief executives of Barclays plc, Clydesdale Bank, HSBC, ING Direct UK, Lloyds Banking Group, the Royal Bank of Scotland Group, Santander UK, Tesco Bank, Virgin Money and the Chartered Banker Institute. Together, the initial signatories serve more than 70 million UK customers and employ more than 350,000 individuals working in banking in the UK. The Chartered Banker Code of Professional Conduct they developed and adopted describes a personal commitment to professionalism in banking by treating all customers, colleagues and counterparties with respect and integrity, considering the risks and implications of my actions and advice and holding myself accountable for them and for the impact these may have on others, complying with all current regulatory and legal requirements and following best industry practice, treating information with appropriate confidentiality and sensitivity, being alert to and managing potential conflicts of interest which may arise whilst performing my role, developing and maintaining my professional knowledge and skills, and acting at all times in a fair, honest, trustworthy and diligent manner. Thank you for listening. Please visit our other case studies and discovery sessions in the Ethics, Culture and Conduct Toolkit, and please share your views with other session participants on our discussion forum. Remember to record your time as professionalism and ethics on your CPD logbook.